To the DMAIC session. We will be recording this session. Unfortunately, our live stream is experiencing technical difficulties, so we will not be able to utilize that, but you will see session recordings here put up on our website very soon. The link to that is in the chat as well. So thank you for all of those who have joined. Good morning. My name is Lubna Jamal. I'm a member of the conference team and a strategic project manager here at the Colorado Department of Public Safety. I am very excited to officially welcome you to Using DMAIC to Improve Human Systems. We are honored to have Tim Runge as our presenter. But before Tim begins his presentation, allow me to cover some meeting norms. We know many of you may already be familiar with these Google Meeting functionalities, but wanted to highlight some of its features. So if you're joining via phone, some of these functionalities will be limited, unfortunately, but for others, a few norms. Just remember to stay muted throughout the session. This ensures all our participants can focus on the presentation, and but there will be other features that you can utilize. You'll notice the Google toolbar at the bottom right. We do have the Google Activities icon there. Chat feature is not enabled for this session. However, feel free to use the Q&A feature. Throw your questions in there, and we will try to get to them towards the end of the session. Unfortunately, we may not be able to get to all of the questions depending on time, but we encourage our attendees to remain on topic. The conference team does reserve the right to remove anyone who may not be aligned with our norms. I'm sure we will not run into that issue, but please bear with us. If you are having technical issues, please use the producer's email. We put that in the chat. We'll do our best to assist you. And if Tim does permit you to come off mute for questions or comments, please state your name for the benefit of those who are unable to see it written on the screen. And again, a reminder that all session materials and video recordings of the session will be available within a week, probably much sooner than that. We try to work pretty fast. If you do get disconnected, run into technical issues, as I did just a little while ago, we will try to have the webinar back up in 5 minutes. In the event we cannot do so, we will record the session and put it up on the website so you can view that later. And then last but not least, there are the reaction buttons open for you to use. Feel free to show your appreciation by using them as much as you can. Finally, you will also notice an icon for the closed captioning at the bottom of the window. If you wish to see closed captioning, please turn it on for yourself. And without further ado, I will say that we are very fortunate to have Tim with us today. He is a specialist in process improvement and leadership development, and he focuses on collaborating with groups to solve complex human system problems. He has a 22-year career with REI before he joined the state. That was from sales, process redesign, executive coaching. So he has a lot under his belt. Currently, he applies this expertise at the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, CDPHE, and he helps oversee their department strategic goals and related improvement efforts. So without further ado, a warm welcome to Tim. Over to you, Tim, and I will stop sharing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for the kind introduction, Lubna, and thank you for helping make all of this possible. I really appreciate the opportunity to share something that has served me well over many years, and I sincerely hope that everyone who's taking the time here to join, it serves you as well. So let me share screen and we'll dive right in. Here we go. And here it goes. Okay, cool. Well, thank you again for everyone that's here. I want to call back to some of those introduction remarks from Jesse and from the governor when they were opening this whole session, and they talked about the work that we have to do in government. They talked about the challenges that we face and how it is really unique what we do, and therefore how we approach it is also really unique. Our job in government is to solve the hardest problems that are out there. Government's been a thing for a long time. People have been trying to work together to solve problems for their communities, for their states, for their nations for a long time. And a lot of the easy problems are already done. So what are we left with? The hardest problems. Also, the problems that we face are the ones that are not profitable to solve. If they were, people would already be profiting off of them. So we're left with the hard ones. And also, there are people who might be solving similar problems to the problems that you face and that you see around you every day. And they might have found solutions in their context and their environment. But there's a strong chance that the problems that you face have different stakeholders, different policies that shape them, different time, different resources. And so, frankly, the problems that you face don't have solutions. Your job is not to come in and to know the answers to how to solve the problems we face. It's to get really good at learning. That is what we have to do. If we were just solving the same problems other people were solving, you would know the answers and we would just have to figure out how to apply them. That is not our work. Our work is learning how to solve problems that no one has solved before in a place that they have never been solved. The good news is there is a path that can make us comfortable to diving in to even the most awkward situations and even the hottest fires. My boss likes to joke that I am drawn like a moth to a flame to the most awkward and most radioactive problems and situations. And it's kind of true. It's not just because I'm a little weird. Maybe I am, maybe, I don't know. But it's because I have a reliable way that I can approach these things. And it makes me comfortable diving in because I know the path we're going to follow. And I also know that we can get out safely if we have to. That's what I want to share with you today. It's a path that has served me really well in many situations, and I hope that it serves you in getting really good at leading those you work with in learning how to solve these problems with no answers. That framework, what I follow, it's known as DMAIC. Some of you are probably familiar with it. If you're not, you'll get a little bit of an introduction. If you are, maybe I'm hoping it'll give you a new way of thinking about how to apply it. This is what I call a framework for learning. DMAIC stands for Define, Measure, Analyze, Improve, Control. It's an acronym. When you follow it, you define the problem, you measure the problem, you analyze the root causes leading to that problem, then you improve the situation. Finally, you control the results. I'm going to go in deeper into each of these phases, but a little bit of history. This framework is built on a long history of the scientific method and scientific thinking. And if you're familiar with continuous improvement, you've probably heard of the PDCA cycle. That is a similar structure and the same basic concept behind it, but I find this structure to be a little bit more useful because it guides the thinking a little bit more precisely. And it gives me a little bit better roadmap that I can lean on when things start to get weird. This structure is part of the Six Sigma body of knowledge, which was first described by Bill Smith and Michael Harry at Motorola back in the 80s. And I see some people are familiar. That's awesome. This is a body of knowledge about how to increase precision in processes. And it was first written in a manufacturing and a high precision environment, and even the term Six Sigma references a level of precision that we're aiming for. And oftentimes when people talk about Six Sigma or DMAIC, they talk about it in a manufacturing context. It's often trained in a manufacturing context using that kind of example. But my argument for you today is that it works everywhere. Now, in government, we are rarely aiming for a Six Sigma level of precision. But DMAIC is about learning. It's a framework for learning, and it serves us really well. And I hope it can serve you as well. So let's dive in a little deeper. One, the DMAIC framework contains no answers. If your boss comes to you and says, you know that DMAIC thing, how do we solve this problem? They're thinking about it wrong. It's important to recognize that DMAIC is not the source for answers. It's a path, a framework for approaching solving of problems and a routine that leads to solutions. It's the journey you will take to find the answers. The cool thing about that is it means you can go into a problem not knowing the solution, but still feeling comfortable that you know the path. And I love this phrase. I repeat it to myself oftentimes when people say, well, how do we solve this problem? I say, I don't know, but I know how to learn. Let's learn together. This gets you in the right mindset to approach whatever problem you might be facing. I'm going to come back to this one a couple times, I think. All right, so let's go a little deeper into each of the phases. The essence of define is you just define which problem you're addressing. There are thousands of problems we could be solving any day. In the define phase, you document which one are you going to work on with these people in this time? And then you define the scope. We all know about scope creep. If you allow scope creep, you'll never solve everything. So you got to define which problem you're going to solve. And then you confirm alignment and understanding. This is one of the things that's uniquely important in human systems, is that we all have to understand where we're going together. The define phase helps you do that. Then you go into the measure phase. And this is where we're going to find out what's really going on. In the define phase, we're often playing with assumptions and stories. In the measure phase, you replace those assumptions with facts. And then you make sure that everyone understands what is really going on. The analyze phase is then when you determine why those things are the way they are. We figured out what's going on. Now we answer why it's going on. And we determine which root causes must be addressed. And then we can go on to the improve phase, where we design a set of solutions and get support for them, and then we implement those solutions. Finally, the control phase is where we find out if our solution was successful. Hopefully it was, good chance it was, maybe it wasn't. If not, we learn from our mistakes and we start again. That's the DMAIC process at a really high level. I'm going to dive in deep here in just a second into each of the phases and how you might apply it in our context. But I want to emphasize this framework, this way of thinking, it comes from industry and precision manufacturing. And oftentimes people write it off because they're like, oh, we don't work in that level. We don't use those kinds of tools. We don't do statistical analysis. And you're right, we probably don't need to. But I argue that we should bring this structure from the factory to the forum where we work to bring people together, because it is a framework for learning. And the tools you might use in each phase are going to look a little different. And I'll introduce a few that I really love using. But this way of thinking can help you dive into some of the most awkward challenges that you face with the confidence to guide those around you in the learning to find the solutions that you need. So let's dive in deep. Define phase. This is where we start the learning journey. One of the most important things that you do in the define phase is you define the problem that you're trying to solve. This often takes the form of a problem statement. I love a really simple problem statement framework, which is current state, ideal state, and the gap between. If you're only talking about the current state, there's a pretty good chance you're just complaining. And complaining doesn't help anything. If you're only talking about the ideal state, there's a pretty good chance you're just dreaming. And dreaming, you know, it's nice to dream once in a while, but the gap between is actually the problem you need to solve. Really simple example here. The ideal state, if you created a form and you wanted people to fill it out, you probably pictured people filling it out properly. And then you give it to someone, and the first version that they fill out looks like this. That's the current state. It didn't work. The problem is one form filled out incorrectly. That is a gap you can bridge. That is a problem that you can solve. We have a number of handouts that are available on the website that I've put together. One of them is a guide to good problem statements. You don't have to look at it now. You can look at all of them afterwards. I'll reference a few, but they're intended to give you something to look at after we're done here to kind of deepen your understanding of some of these concepts. The problem statement is so important. I have a little guide on that. The define phase is where you will go from very vague statements like, this team is dysfunctional, which I don't know if that's true or not, and we can't do anything about it, to a problem statement such as, the team is reviewing 80% of applications after the deadline, current state. Statute says we need to have them all reviewed by the deadline, but we agree that 80% complete on time would be enough for now. Ideal state. We need to increase completion rate by 60%. That is the gap we need to close. Or another example, we go from a really vague, not useful statement like, everyone is upset and leaving, to something more useful like, turnover on this team is 40% per year, current state. That is double the average of teams in this department and leading, which is ideal state, and leading to all sorts of negative outcomes. Gives a little gravitas to the situation. We want to cut turnover in this team by half. That is the gap we want to close. That gives you a problem that you can solve, and by writing it down and showing it to people, you can get that alignment. And then oftentimes you want to set a goal, ideally a SMART goal. If you're not familiar with SMART goals, Google it. But why would you set a goal if you've already defined the ideal state? Because oftentimes in a project that you're doing, you might recognize that achieving the ideal is a long way off. And maybe for this project, say in the next 3 months with this team working together, we're going to set a goal of improving our percentage completion by 20%. and give us something to celebrate when we achieve it, knowing that we've moved in the direction of the ideal state. It's problem statement, goal, part of the define phase. Another thing that's really important to do in the define phase is identify the players in this game. Who's going to be involved in solving this problem? You want to know who your sponsor is. They are the person that has all the power over the situation, the formal power. I often jokingly think of them as who could accidentally get in the way of solving this problem if they didn't know what was going on. Oftentimes, that's, the executive director, or maybe if the problem is somewhere over here in a team, you might need to get that director on board. That sponsor is super important. They may not have to do much, but you got to bring them along. And then you got to know who the change agent is. Oftentimes that's you. Maybe you're working with someone else who's leading the work. And you need to know who your project team is. Oftentimes there will be a team of people who might be close to the problem and that you're going to work with closely as you move through this process. Identify them now. And then you want to identify the impacted people. And these are all the people that are affected directly by the problem who you're likely to interact with, and you might be actually trying to change their job by solving this problem. You got to bring them along, identify them now. And also there are advocates and supporters. These might be people who are not directly in control of the situation, but they might have resources that you need, or they might have the ability to support the work that you're doing. Identify them early. If you identify all of these people in the define phase, you have a much better chance of being successful. I'm going to share an example that I went through in the past, and I'm going to work through each of the phases here. We're going to call this the SVEM team. We defined the problem statement as is written here. The SVEM team in April 2021 reported a barriers to execution score of 38. Barriers to execution was one question on our employee survey. Ideally, that score would be on par with the rest of the department. That's our ideal state. We believe this 12-point gap is evidence of a range of engagement, alignment, and empowerment challenges experienced by the team. Though the team is meeting its commitments to the organization, the team reports low engagement and an inability to maintain harmony in work and life. This took 2 months to get to that statement, to get agreement that that was the problem we needed to solve. We also then defined a goal, and over here on the right, that goal is essentially achieve the ideal state. And we just put a date on it, by the end of 2022. On the bottom left, you can see we had the project team. Names have been removed to protect the innocent. We also, in our standard format, had identified critical success factors and KPIs early in the project. But this was the essence of our define phase. And then we made sure that everyone on the team saw this and knew where we were going. In the define phase, a couple tips. Agreement is actually more important than accuracy. This is one of the places where I differ a little bit from traditional Six Sigma. Oftentimes you're looking at precision very early on, but in human systems, we often don't actually know what's going on. We're usually making up a bunch of stories, but in the define phase, that's actually okay. What's most important is you get everyone agreeing on the problem from their perspective and agreeing to support you in solving that. And do not rush the define phase. More often than not, when I get later in problem solving, I find that the root cause of the challenge that I'm facing, which is often people not being on board, is because I rushed the define phase and I did not have agreement with everyone that I needed to. This is our second reference to Einstein today. If I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about solutions. I remember this quote when I feel like I'm spending too much time in the define phase. And I use it to just reinforce it's worth it. The key question you're answering here is, does everyone that I think will need to be involved in solving this problem agree with how we have defined it and agree to support the effort of solving it? Now, I mentioned that one of the reasons that I'm comfortable diving into awkward situations is because I know there are exits where I can get out safely. And this is one of them. The end of the define phase. If you cannot get that agreement, get out. It is not worth your time to try to solve a problem that you can't even get agreement and sponsorship to solve. There are so many problems we could be solving that you should say, all right, it looks like we don't have agreement that this problem needs to be solved. And I've done this. I've gone to vice presidents and said, y'all don't agree that this is an important problem to solve right now. So I'm not going to spend my time on it, and I'm not going to waste your time. We're going to go work on something else. It's why I don't hesitate to start, because I know that we can put it on ice and we can go work on something else. This is that one of the 3 moments when I often do that. But let's say we got that agreement. Hallelujah, everyone is aligned. We are going to solve a problem. We go on to the measure phase. I love the measure phase. It's where we go from stories to facts. Define phase, all sorts of stories. People are making all sorts of stuff up. In the measure phase, when you're done, there will be no more stories. There will be facts and data. If it is knowable and relevant to the problem you're trying to solve, then you should probably know it, or someone in the project team should. Really, essentially, it looks like identify what you need to know, go find out, and summarize your findings and share that with everyone involved. Now, the measure phase is one place where DMAIC in human systems looks very different than DMAIC in manufacturing. Because we're often looking at what are people doing? How are people doing it? How are people working together? What is this process that's happening that might have a whole lot of variation in it because it's all done by people on different desks? We're not looking at how a machine is machining a precise thing and measuring with calipers. No, we're talking to people, and we're seeing the patterns in human behavior. This is where I turn to a number of other bodies of knowledge that help me measure human behavior. Sociology. I have 100 years of history in figuring out ways of measuring what people do. So if you are dealing with a problem and it has to do with people doing stuff and you're not sure how to measure it, look up sociology. And someone has found a way to measure it. If you're trying to measure feelings, psychology. Psychology has found ways of measuring all manner of feelings. It's beautiful. I love it. It lets you put numbers and measurement behind how are people feeling and then what are they doing. Marketing and sales has given us all sorts of ways of measuring what people do as they interact with your organization or your product. A common one that people are familiar with is the Net Promoter Score. And that's a great way of measuring what people do. And then, of course, in government, we measure all sorts of things. The amount of data that I can find about how Colorado is functioning is massive. And yet it's funny, we often don't measure how we work. We just measure everything outside. But you can often get good inspiration from government to measure how we're functioning. There's always a way to measure how a team or a process or a team and their process are working. A few examples here. I love the happy or not buttons. You might have seen them in airports. It's a really simple way to get a sample of data from customers about how they're feeling about the situation they just experienced. I have the calendar here to inspire you to think about timing. Now, in manufacturing, often that means like measuring fractions of a second. In government, we don't do anything in a fraction of a second. Pretty much everything takes a while. And we might be measuring days, weeks, maybe even months, but you can almost always measure like when a request came in and when the request was closed, or when an email was received and when it was responded to. And you don't have to measure every one. Sampling is really useful. And another thing that people often forget, if you want to know what's going on, go talk to people. I often will look up in the org chart who is in the system that is related to this problem. I'll find their phone number and I call them. People like talking about their work. They like talking about what they're doing. And you can often just ask them, hey, what's your experience in this job? Sometimes people find it a little weird at first, but if you're friendly, they will often give you all sorts of information. And then AI makes it really easy to do things like sentiment analysis, to get a whole bunch of information from people and figure out what are the positive trends and what are the negative trends. That is a form of measurement. These are all measurements that we can do. If you are facing a problem and people say, well, we don't measure it, that is not an excuse. You can, and you should in the measure phase. In the measure phase, we're going from judgments, which we have a whole bunch of those in the define phase, such as everyone does it wrong, to observations, such as there are 7 distinct methods being used currently for application review. How would you know? Because you observed them, or maybe people described them to you. You might go from something like, people don't even show up to meetings. Maybe that's true. To an observation, in the last 4 meetings, only 62% of the team was in attendance. We can observe that. That is not hard to count. So in the example that I started with the SVEM team, we measured. We had a team of 55 people. We had 3 years of employee engagement survey data. We had a special survey that we did just for this project. We had that barriers to execution score, which was one specific question. We had turnover data that we got from HR. We also did individual interviews. We did small group interviews, and then we found the trends in those, and we asked people, hey, who wants to talk about this trend? And we had these affinity group conversations. It didn't take that long, really, and people wanted to talk about what they were frustrated by. We also did meeting observations. I sat in on team meetings, and I sat in on whole division meetings, and just observed who talks, who doesn't talk, what do we talk about, how much time do different people spend talking, all sorts of things like that. And we reviewed documentation. We looked at who communicates about what, how do we communicate, what kind of plans are out there, project plans, what kind of scoreboards do they keep, and another great thing to keep an eye on is what does the team celebrate, if they celebrate anything. And that will tell you a lot about how a team is functioning and what they care about. In the measure phase, we have a couple things to look for. One, don't measure everything. If you have defined your problem well and your scope well, ideally you're going to know, what do I need to know? If you try to measure the entire world, you're going to be here forever. And this is one of the places where I sometimes recognize, like, I'm not clear on what I need to measure. I probably didn't have enough clarity in my define phase. And one of the things I love about the measure phase is enjoying the myth busting, because in that define phase, you're going to hear everyone's stories. Oftentimes, it's the leaders making up stories about what's going on because they're not in the work every day, and they make assumptions, and they tell these stories. And I frankly love coming back with data that says, you're not actually right. Here is what is actually happening. And usually the response is quite good. Usually the leaders will come back and be like, all right, I didn't know. That is good to know. I love that. I love that interaction. The key question in the measure phase really is anyone still making up stories? If they are, go measure it. Find out if their stories are true or not, and have some data to back it up. And then before you move on, share what you learned. Now, this is part of that we need to learn together. You've identified that group of people in the define phase that you need to bring along. Share with them all of your data and show them, here's what I learned. Here's everything that we found out. It's fascinating. That sets you up well for the analyze phase. And this is where we determine why the problem persists. Now, measure phase is all about what's going on. Phase is why is it still going on? We're going to identify all the contributing root causes we can, and we're going to figure out how many of those you need to address and which you can live with. And then you might go back and measure more. The DMAIC process, a lot of people think of it as a linear beginning to end. Oftentimes you kind of bounce back and forth between the phases, but it's still a really useful path. Oftentimes in the analyze phase, you'll realize, oh, there's actually something that I don't know, or we need a little more information about that. And you'll go back and do some more measurement. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. In the measure, analyze go from something that might be an assumption, like there's lots of turnover because people are unhappy. Common story that I hear. At the end of the analyze phase, hopefully you can be much specific, like there is turnover because 50% of the team believes pay is not competitive, 70% of the team reports confusion about the goals of the team, 3 of the last 4 resignations reported being aggressively recruited away, and a quarter of the team reported a perception of unfair treatment by leadership. Those are all things we can deal with. I can't deal with unhappy. So this is how you're moving from not being sure of what's going on to being able to get to solutions. One of my favorite tools in the analyze phase, and this is one of the places where working in human systems differs significantly from working in manufacturing. This I call the waterline model. It's one of the handouts we have available to you, adapted from Harrison. It's a great way of looking at a human system and a team and how it's functioning and figuring out what's going on. Above the waterline, you have the task that team is built to accomplish. And every day they're working toward achieving whatever goal it is. It might be filling potholes. It might be getting forms filled out. It might be paying unemployment or issuing unemployment checks. That's the above the waterline. Below the waterline is all the structure about how that team is functioning. And this model reminds us to snorkel before you scuba. What that means is look just under the waterline. The first thing you would look at is the structure of the team. Is the purpose clear? Are the goals clear? Are the roles on the team clear? Are the policies known? Are the resources available? Is the scope of the team well defined? Oftentimes people will jump way down below the waterline and they'll say, skills, we need more training. Clearly, that's the problem. The team needs more training. And very often I engage with that team and I realize, no, They don't need more training. They don't know who's supposed to be doing what. Roles are unclear, and therefore, of course, they're going to struggle. Now, if the structure is well-defined, you might then go down to group process, things like norms, decision-making, communication methods, accountability methods. If there's no accountability, there's a pretty good chance, it doesn't matter what their skills are, they may not be getting things done. Or do they have methods for dealing with conflict? If not, you're going to have conflict, and that's going to get in the way of getting your tasks done. Then you go after group process a little deeper to the interpersonal elements, and finally the personal elements. But I strongly recommend when you're working with a team, be it yours or another, look under the waterline and see what exists, what's working, what's not. There's likely a root cause there that can be addressed. For example, going back to the SVEM team, out of our engagement with the team, we identified 11 root causes. We bunched them into two categories, one related to getting work done and one related to how the team works together. I bring this up because part of the analyze phase is identifying which root causes you're going to address. And we agreed, we are not going to address all 11 of these. We're going to address 4. They're underlined here. On the left, goals and priorities are nebulous, but the work is not. That's one of the first things under the waterline. This was a clear issue with this team, and we could address it. On the right-hand side, decision-making processes are unclear. Yep, that's going to lead to trouble. We can address that. Also, lack of psychological safety was a major concern across the team. We could address that. And finally, one of my favorites on the bottom, the boss gets his nose in my stuff and then insert waste here. You might have experienced this before. It's a common pattern as well. That has to do with role clarity. What's the boss supposed to do? What are you supposed to do? And how you're supposed to work together. And we could address that. That's the analyze phase in human systems. A couple tips, partner with HR. You're in CDPHE, our HR team is like our cousins. We work with them all the time. We get information from them. We share information with them. And having them as a friend is really helpful when you're dealing with people. That's their job. It's great. You also don't have to fix everything. Like I said in that example, we identified 11 root causes. And we said, and this is kind of painful sometimes, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7 of those, we said, these are going to exist, and we're not going to do anything about them. And that kind of sucks sometimes. But if you identify the 4 that you must address, and that helps you narrow your focus so you can have a real positive impact rather than trying to change the whole world. The key question in this phase is, do we agree that we have identified enough addressable contributing root causes that we believe we can meet our goal? Now, this is another exit point. You might get here and realize that one of the critical or multiple critical root causes to the challenge that team is facing are not in your power to solve. It's no fun. It's a bummer. But if you've done the work of bringing people along all the way, it's generally pretty easy to show them that and say, look, we can't solve this right now. Let's go work on something that we can. And that might be a place where you're going to wrap up the project, you're going to file everything away, and you're going to go work on something else. It's no fun to do that here, because you put a lot of work into it, but it's more fun to do that than it is to go to try to the next phase when you really can't solve the problem. Now, you might go back to the define phase and redefine your goal or even redefine your problem, but essentially, this is kind of one of those checkpoints where you double check and you see, like, do I still think I can solve this? And share what was decided before you move on. Again, you're bringing everyone along so that they know how you got to where you got, and they're going to be on board in making things better. Finally, the phase that everyone has been waiting for, the improve phase. This is the phase that everyone wants, is to actually make things better. And you've spent a lot of time learning about the whole situation, but that learning was necessary to empower your improved phase. I usually approach this phase in kind of 2 parts. Part 1 is design your solution. You come up with how to address your root causes, you map out your plan, like literally write it down, and then you get support from your sponsors for that plan. Some of the tools you might use here would be brainstorming solutions. Engage the people that you are working with and ask them, how do they think you would address these root causes that need to be addressed? And then the impact effort matrix is a really useful tool for prioritizing all of those ideas. This is one of the handouts we have available to you. It's a simple way of looking at all of the ideas and identifying which ones do we think are going to have the biggest impact for the least effort. That's where we should probably start. And we also have a project plan template that we're sharing with you. Like I said, write down your plan. It's really easy to have it in your head, but you're bringing people along. We're learning together. And so if they don't know your plan and can't see it, it's going to be a lot harder to bring them along. So take the time to write your plan down. And at this point, I think of it as a proposal. Until you've gotten your support from your sponsors, that's all it is. You say, I think this will work. And then you present it. And then when they look at that and say, yep, let's give it a go. Part 2, implement your plan. Now you do it. In this area, there's all sorts of tools that you would use. Project management is one of the main bodies of knowledge. You are now executing a project. You are implementing your ideas for improvement. And that's about getting stuff done. And then, of course, there is change management, which is bringing people along on that change. Now, if you've done the define, the measure, and the analyze really well, and you've brought people along, you've already done a lot of the change management, but not all of it, because you're about to change how things work. And that requires change management when you're working with people. This is where you're going from that statement that everyone loves, you know what you should do, to we have a plan, we have support for it, and we are executing it together. Much higher chance of being successful in making change. The example with the SBEM team, we had these 4 root causes that we were trying to address, and we made one plan for each of them. When it came to goals and priorities, the team learned about OKRs, objectives and key results. It's a goal-making framework. They created OKRs, they put them in a place that people could see them, and they referenced them regularly. It helped clarify what their goals were. For decision-making clarity, we developed a decision-making guide. There are ways of making decisions, and you can be explicit about them. We rolled those out to the managers, and they practiced that with their teams. When it comes to psychological safety, there are also skills and practices that can help create environments where people are more likely to feel safe. The leadership team studied that. They practiced those habits. They then trained their management team. And they also introduced a norm-setting process, which empowered the team to then influence the norms that they would operate by to create an environment where they felt more safe. And then we reinforced that in the team meetings. And for the area where the boss's nose gets in everything, the boss studied the Shingo model. If you're not familiar with the Shingo model, it's a great framework for how to build a high-performing organization. He studied this. He then practiced the skills that are outlined there with a coach. And he also practiced very intentionally the question, what would support look like to you? And that was a great way for him to show up in a supporting role without getting in their business when they didn't need him there. Those were the different plans. Now, we actually had execution plans that were much more significant, but I want to give you a sense of what they might look like for human system improvement. In the improve phase, a couple tips. Start with the quick wins. In the analyze or measure phase, you're probably going to identify some things that you might be able to address without a lot of resources and without a lot of support. And you just say, yeah, we can do that. Do that. It's a great way to gain momentum, to gain the trust of the team, and to start to build that credibility that you're going to need to get support for your much bigger plans to address the much more challenging root causes. And then do not implement your plan if you don't have support. This is one of the places where I see people burn out. They do all the work to come up with these plans. They don't get the sponsorship for it, and then they struggle mightily for months often to execute their improvement plan, knowing that, like, this is going to help, it's going to be really good, but they're struggling alone. Don't do that. Make sure you have the support from the leadership team, from the rest of the team that you're working with to execute these plans, and then execute it with them. This is one of those exit points. If you don't have that, I have gone back to leadership teams and I've said, it looks like we don't have what we need right now to implement. That's okay. We have other problems. Wrap this up and I'm going to put it away. The key question here is, do we believe in our plan? And then did we execute it? And do this work in public? Put your plan on a wall. If you don't work in person, hopefully you have an intranet site or something, somewhere your team goes. Put your plans there. In my team, we have this one of our norms. We work in public. All of our project plans, all of our work is saved in files that the entire team can access. It helps us be more efficient. It also helps us collaborate, and then you can share that with the people you're working with, and everyone can come along. So that's the improve phase. Let's say you implemented. Now what? The control phase. This one's easy to forget. It's easy to skip. It is kind of important, though, because the big question is, did it work? You're going to go from, we worked really hard, which I hear all the time, but the people of Colorado don't actually care how hard you work. They only care if you got stuff done. So that's what we're going to find out. We're going to move from did we worked really hard to we know we solved this problem, or we know we didn't. It's good to be clear on that. And if you didn't, you can learn. That's all right too. In here, there's all sorts of tools that you might use in continuous improvement. Visual management is one of the most common ones. It's a great way of just putting the numbers on a wall somewhere or on a site somewhere that people can see what our current results are. There also might be formal scheduled check-ins. Our team does generally 3 follow-ups after a project. If it's a really fast process that's very regular, you might do those follow-ups, 3 follow-ups in 1 week. If it's a really slow process that happens over a long period of time, you might check in once a quarter for 3 quarters. Or a common framework that we use is 30, 60, 90 days, just to see if it worked. Another thing you might use here is standard work. That's documenting the new process, documenting what works so that people have something to reference and continue following the new way. And you might go back and do observation, just like you did in the measure phase, just to see if it's working, to see how things are operating. And you can use celebrations as a tool to cement what's working, or even to get people to find out if it's working. I will sometimes go back and say, I would love to have a celebration, but we don't know actually if it worked yet. Can you find out? And that can be good motivation for people to measure their results and do it in a positive way. Going back to my example, we had this barriers to execution question, and the green line was kind of the department average, and the gray line was where we were at April 21 all the way to November 22. And you can see the gray line exceeded the green line. That was our goal. We were successful. We celebrated. We also had just a general engagement score on our employee engagement survey, and you can see the department average, and then where our team was, and you see a significant improvement. That was awesome to see. We also asked questions about each of the specific root causes that we were looking at, and in the area of goal clarity, we had 3/4 of the team that were at least identifying somewhat or strong clarity in their goals, which that's pretty good. We still had room to improve, but that was a significant improvement. In the area of decision-making clarity, we didn't make as much progress, but we did have almost half the team identifying an improvement. And if we can make things better for half the team, that's good. I'll take that as a win. And in the area of psychological safety, we had over 3/4 of the team reporting that things were doing pretty well. In the area of the boss gets his nose and everything, we didn't do a survey question on that one, but we did do observation, and we got feedback that things were getting better. And this was what we were looking at, and we brought this back to the team. We showed these results to the whole team, and that was part of the celebration. It was pretty awesome. The control phase, couple tips: be just as rigorous as the problem deserves. If you're addressing a small problem that doesn't happen very often, and you didn't invest that much time in coming up with a solution, invest about that much time in figuring out if it worked. But if you've spent months trying to figure out how to solve this problem, put some rigor into figuring out if it worked, both for the good of the team, for the good of the learning, and you can put it on your resume. So that's pretty cool too. And then use those celebrations as an excuse to verify performance. That asking those questions, we want to celebrate, but we need to know what we did. And you can get people to usually go back and measure and give you at least something you can celebrate in your control phase. Key question you're answering here: did it work? That's it. That's the DMAIC path. It takes you from we've got a big mess to things are a little bit better. How do you get started? One, get familiar with the core elements that are in each of these phases. I learned about it in a Six Sigma class. It was like 8 weeks, I think 4 hours a week, and then we went and did some projects, and it was really useful. I also think it can be helpful to work with someone who's used it before, and you can learn from their patterns and their methods. And then you can also pick a challenge that you face and map your learning journey. This can start as a thought exercise. What would I do if I were, going to define this problem? How might I measure it? How might I analyze it? And then try it. Oftentimes it's great to do this with a buddy. That's how I learned it. And it was really helpful to bounce ideas off of each other of what would we do in each phase as we were moving through. And start with small problems. Start with simple things that you can kind of over-index on the structure as a way of learning the pattern and learning why you might do it. For me, it took 3 repetitions to get sold on this path. The first time I was like, all right, it kind of helps, I guess. But I didn't really get how all the pieces fit together. The second time, I could see how they fit together, and I could see why I did things in the define phase that paid off in the measure and analyze and improve phase. Or if I didn't do them very well, why I struggled in the improve phase because I skipped things that I should have done sooner. By the third time I did it, I was sold. I now use this structure, whether I tell people or not, I use it all the time in just thinking how I'm going to approach solving a problem. Some common pitfalls to avoid: jumping to the improve phase. Your boss is probably going to say, solve this problem, do something. And you might have to say, great, I will. You might not even mention that you're going to do the define, measure, and analyze before you get to the improve. But if you do, your chance of being successful in the improve phase significantly increases. If the problem's worth solving, it's worth doing it carefully. Another thing that people do is skipping or rushing the define phase. Like I mentioned in the example that I shared, we spent 2 months talking about this problem just to get everyone aligned on what we were going to do. Sometimes I'll tell people, I don't have the time to try to solve a problem that we don't have the time to define. If it's not that important, it's not that important to me, and I'm going to work on something else. And finally, along on the learning journey, you might get to that improve phase and find out that people are not bought in. And that might be because you didn't do the work in the define, measure, and analyze to bring people along. So do yourself a favor, share what you're doing in the early phases, and your improve phase will be so much easier. So that's it. No problem is scary when you have a reliable path to finding solutions. The DMAIC is that roadmap to finding solutions. You'll fill each of the phases with the tools that you like and you use, but gives you the confidence to go forward. And you can lead people in learning even when you don't know what you're going to learn or you don't know what the solution is, and that leadership will be appreciated. At the end of that project that I did with that team, in my example, the leader of that division came to me and said, you know what I really appreciate is you came into this big mess and you brought structure, and you guided us through that structure that helped us make things better. And that was one of the things they appreciated the most. And even there was a senior vice president that asked me, Tim, how is it that you do what you do? And I kind of explained it. And then he said, can you do it again with this other team? I said, yes, because we have a path. And I hope that this path serves you as well and that you can do the same thing. You can always start with, I don't know, but I know how to learn. Let's learn together. And that's going to get you and the people you are working with in the right mindset. This is what we do every day. This is the Office of Strategy, Performance, and Innovation at the CDPHE. We don't always use the DMAIC structure, but it kind of underpins how we approach many of our projects and the things that we do. And none of us are experts in air quality or water quality or health facilities, or all the things that our department does. But we know how to learn, and we know how to lead people in learning. And I hope that you can join this team in doing that in your department. So thank you. I've got time for a few questions. I've got a few questions here that have been sent to me. I appreciate you doing that. I thank you for all that you do in solving the problems that are around you and serving the state of Colorado. If you want to talk about some of these things, my contact information is here. I love this stuff. I'm a nerd for it. But really, I hope that you will at least explore this way of working and give it a try. And I hope that it serves you just as well. So I'm going to go to a couple questions here, unless Rio or Lubna should be doing.
Yeah, Rio has been collecting the questions. Rio, do you want to share those out?
Tim, the questions are on the chat. Do you want me to read it out to you?
Oh, I can do it. Thank you. We've got a question from Indra who asked, what are the best practices or techniques for measuring if it's not provided to you? So that depends a whole lot on the situation you're in and the problem you're trying to solve. The measure phase, I think, is kind of fun because figuring out how to quantify what people are doing and what's going on, it can be challenging. I mentioned a few bodies of knowledge that have different ways of measuring things. I think I got inspired. I have a minor in sociology, and so that was where I started to learn that, like, oh shoot, you can measure, you can quantify what people do. And so where I would start when you get to that measure phase, or when you're even thinking about the measure phase, is with those stories. What are the stories people are telling? And then figure out, can I quantify that in any sort of way? It could be as simple as, are other people telling the same story? I think one of my examples was that 7 or a portion of the team has the same story in mind. That can be a measurement. And you could say, like, half the team believes this. And you could be measuring a belief can be one way of measuring what's going on within a team. And especially if half the team believes something and the leadership does not, then having that gap in understanding is going to be part of the conflict that's going on. So I can't say that there is like a specific way of measuring. One of the most common that we do is informational interviews. We go talk to people. We look for trends and we find them. And oftentimes that will then lead you to other things you can measure. In those interviews, people will say things like, our system's down all the time. And then I'll ask, well, how often is it down? We can measure that. And you might ask your IT team, tell me how often your system is actually down. Is it a story or is it a fact? Measure phase. Kaylin asks, what is the difference between the project document in define and the project document in improve? In define, you're defining the problem-solving effort. So you're defining the problem you're going to solve, who's involved, and what your goal is, what the goal is that you're aiming for. In the improve phase, it's a plan or a project plan for execution of your solution. So by that time, you're already clear on what the problem is. You already know all the data behind it. And from a measure phase, you've already analyzed those root causes. Now you're making an action plan to actually go and change how the work happens so that the problem goes away. They're definitely related. And oftentimes I will reference one and the other. In our team, we have what we call our project implementation form, our PIF. That's kind of where we define the project. And then we have an action plan that we build with the team, and that's the plan for how they're going to solve the problem. So they feed on each other. They tend to focus on different things, the activities of learning and the activities of changing the work to solve the problem.
And we'll have time for one more question.
All right, cool. I love this last question. Say you're pulled in late to the project and they're having trouble agreeing, yet the sponsor wants it's completed. That's every project we're involved in. Oftentimes, we will end up doing the define and the measure kind of behind the scenes. And I will go ask people questions. One of the reasons that they might be having a hard time solving the problem is because they don't actually agree on what the problem is. They might not even know it. And I don't have to necessarily tell them that, but I'll go ask all the people involved that have already been working on this for a while, hey, what problem are you solving? And if they give me different answers, yeah, of course you're having a hard time. So I might do that define, measure, and analyze a little bit behind the scenes. And then I'll kind of bring it up to the team and be like, hey, this is what's going on here. And kind of then bring them into the pattern. If you lead with saying, we're going to do DMAIC, sometimes they'll be like, no, just solve the problem. And so sometimes I don't even say, I'm going to do DMAIC. Sometimes I'll just do it. I'll ask the questions. I'll do the activities. And I'll say, look, we found a solution. It doesn't always work, but often that's a way to kind of get up to speed, an on-ramp in the learning journey. All right. Well, Lubna, thank you for setting the stage here. Pass it back to you.
Thank you so much. This was highly informational, insightful, and I do encourage our attendees to attend some of our other sessions as well. There's lots more great training coming our way. Like we mentioned, all the materials will be up on our website. Some of them already are. Recordings will come in a little bit. I also want to mention, I've had the pleasure of working with a few members of Tim's team. They are fantastic. We also host a few agencies have partnered for a Black Belt Academy. If anyone is interested, please do reach out to us. We'd love to expand that effort, and we go over a lot of lean methodologies in that class as well. So thank you, Tim. Thank you for everything you shared with us today, and appreciate everyone who was on the call. See you in some of the other sessions. Have a good one.
Bye.